Welcome to Table Talk, Episode 1. I'm here with my training partner and good friend, Trevin Worke. We're here to do a little interview, learn a little bit more about you, how you started in arm wrestling, how you approach the sport, and some of your training insights you might give us.
Okay.
So we'll just start off. Give us a little bit of an autobiographical look at your life. Walk us through, your early years, getting into the sport, and how it was you eventually started arm wrestling.
Okay. I got started in arm wrestling pretty young. I would say I'm probably around like 13, 14 years old. I actually got into it because my dad got into it. So he came across a little tournament up in Tennessee, and he showed up and pulled an amateur class, and ended up winning that class. And so from that point he was hooked. He didn't necessarily start my training immediately. He waited for my body to develop a little bit more. And then he just slowly started introducing me into the practices and getting my tendons and ligaments and body used to the pressures, because obviously when you introduce a younger teenager, like it can be dangerous for their development. So as I started developing, get a little bit stronger, he then started putting me into like high schooler competitions, and there started to develop a lot of teenage competition across the state. And as that went on, I then moved to the amateur class at around 16 or 17 years old. Started consistently placing like second or third every tournament I went in. Then, as I became a little bit older, around 17, I started pulling the pro class. I was the number one team in the state, and at 18, I had become the number one super heavyweight left hand in Tennessee. But then after that, I went to college in Vermont, and that was my first opportunity to travel and get a little experience with other pullers across the country. So while I was up there, I was able to do WAL was still up and active then. They were still bigger, so it was 2016, 2017, and they were having their state qualifiers to travel into Las Vegas for the big prize money they were offering. So I went and I qualified left hand and right hand in the Vermont states, pulling with Bill Sinks up there and that crew. So once I left college and came back, I came back to Tennessee before I joined the Army, and then I traveled to the PAF Nationals and won Nationals. From that point, it was amateur Nationals. It wasn't just the regular pro class Nationals. This was because I had taken a little bit of a break in college. I couldn't train like I wanted to, so this was seeing where I stood. I pulled the Nationals at 242, won left hand and right hand, and also pulled the super class. Only loss I took that day, ironically, was to Corey West. He swept the floor that day. And that was both mine and his last amateur class.
Oh, so you're still an amateur at that time.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So where I had taken, I wasn't officially an amateur, but this was just me because I had taken so much time off and not been training.
Right.
It was an assessment to see like, hey, where do I stand? And traditionally, you were supposed to qualify for the amateur nationals. You're supposed to win that qualifying tournament. But I talked to Anthony, the guy over the league, and he's like, "Yeah, no, you can just show up." And so I did, and ended up winning them. And I don't have the little trophies I got from it here. They're in my storage unit. But yeah, that was the last amateur class that I pulled. It was back in 2017. Then from there, I joined the Army, and there was a slight break in my training and my pursuing of arm wrestling career. And then I went to Korea, and I actually got to pull with some Koreans over there. So arm wrestled with some Koreans, and that was an interesting experience. It showed me how inviting and how inclusive the arm wrestling community is, not only in the United States but like across the world. I didn't really commit to them that much because I had army duties and whatnot, and so I came back to the United States, and obviously now here in Georgia, and met up with the Dirty South Arm Wrestling crew and Ike Ford and all those here, and have slowly and progressively gotten more invested and more involved and a higher quality of performance since being here.
That's good. Talked a little bit about a couple of those events. So you talked about your dad. Obviously, I haven't got to meet him yet. Maybe someday he'll come down.
He's
And pull
Tennessee
with us.
trained.
Yeah. So, besides him, what were some other influences? Either you know, a person or a thing that pushed you in that sport early on.
Okay, so there were two main people, well, three. I mean, there were quite a few that just took on the responsibility of kind of guiding me and helping me develop as I progressed in the sport. So David Owens, I believe he's the one that actually got my dad into the sport. Um, he's been doing it a long time. His dad was doing it too. Um, David Owens arm wrestled in California a lot, so he has a lot of experience under his belt. He was very patient in teaching a preteen and teenager how to arm wrestle. And even though it may not necessarily be the strongest or may not be the most experienced, he aided in that foundational um, knowledge that I have. And also, uh, you have Jeff James up in Tennessee and Jason Gully up in Tennessee. Both of them were very influential and very staple influences in my development.
Okay. So you talked about a couple of this highlights, winning your first at amateur nationals, right? What of all those kind of early accomplishments was there one that really stood out to you? It's like maybe, and you're like, okay, maybe I can do this. This is awesome. I enjoy this.
I think the one that sticks out the most to me is in 2017 at Tennessee State at one of Larray Jenkins tournaments. It was the closest I've gotten, and if it wasn't for my dad, I would have won that state title that day. But me and my dad were both in the exact same the super heavyweight pro class, and I showed up, and of course, being like a 19-year-old, like you get worked up and you kind of just black out a little bit. So like my first match, I get fouled out. Ray Jenkins fouls me out, and then like I have to calm myself down, and it was a bigger class that day. So I come back winning every match all the way up until the finals, and I have to beat my dad twice in order to win. And first match, he gets the buckle on the strap, and I ended up getting the win on him, and that was my first and only win on my dad. It's
tournament win too.
Tournament win.
Yeah.
So that's my first and only win on my dad, and then I had to turn around and do it again. But then he's like, I'm not letting that happen again, and he ended up flash pinning me for the win.
Oh.
So that day in 2017, I think it was August 3rd, we both got first and second in the super heavyweight at Tennessee State.
Awesome. And so you started in Tennessee, came down to Georgia pretty recently. I mean, I think
within the past 4 years.
Past 4 years. And so, how did you get involved with our team, the local team here?
Well, being in the sport as long as you do, and having others that are as invested in the sport, like my dad, and having connections that I did, because I had met people all over. Because I had actually, at one of my first teen tournaments that I went to up in Murfreesboro, I actually arm wrestled one of Ron Bath's sons. It wasn't Ryan. I can't remember his name. It was the other son, but he's not into arm wrestling anymore. So it's the connections established. If you were to go on my Facebook, I would say half of my friends are arm wrestling connections. And then as you connect with those, you meet them. They share things. They share events. And my dad was one of the bigger helps, because I was like, hey, do you know of any groups in this area? Or hey, do you know of any groups in this area? And he was the one that always like helped link me up with the different groups. He was the one that kind of put me in contact with Bill Sinks up in Vermont. He was the one. He's like, hey, there's a tournament here on this day. You should probably show up and maybe try and establish your connection. Because I went to the Buford tournament in, I believe, 2021 is when I first established that connection with Ike Ford and Ryan Bath, to see if there was any groups in the area. And David Hobbs. David Hobbs was there too. Yep. That day, I mean, I showed up. I hadn't had any training. I hadn't done any preparation. It was just a wild hair that I was, you know what? I miss arm wrestling. Like, I miss it, and I miss the competitive aspect. I'm getting out of the Army. I want to get back into it. So I show up, no training, go 0-2. 0-2, both hands.
Oh.
But
sounds like all my tournament entries.
But no, I get in contact with Ike. I start practicing. I start hosting practices, and it just develops from there.
Cool. So you're in our Georgia scene now. You've had some recent interesting matches. Mm-hmm. What are some goals recently? Like some short term goals that you got that you're trying to pursue, and maybe even some long term goals in the sport.
So short term, I'd really like to get my right hand ranked the same way my left hand is. Because my right and left hand, I mean, they pull a little bit differently than one another. So my right hand's always been a little bit stronger than my left hand, but my left has always been better at applying the technique and applying pressures. So currently I'm number 9 in the hook rankings, left hand for the super heavyweights, and number 10 in the SEC, right-handed for the super heavyweights. Right. Again, right behind Paul Passmore.
Our buddy Paul.
But he did just drop to 242.
Yep.
I took my shot there and kind of we saw how that went.
Yeah, we might have to insert some footage.
We saw how that went.
Of that match there.
Even though I didn't win that match, I definitely won that match because I got a lot of experience. I got a lot of knowledge on where I need to work. Mm-hmm. He pulled me aside afterwards, and he kind of talked me through how he went through preparing to arm wrestle me. He's definitely strong. He's definitely an elite puller. But I look forward to seeing him again in December.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. You're cutting down? Are you planning to cut down 242? Yeah. Is that more? Yeah. Is that when's your goal to hit that?
I'd like to hit it at least 3 or 4 weeks before December, the 32-man tournament in December that Luray's having. It's the Beast Mode Nationals. Because that's a big group of people. Because you got Paul Passmore, you got Ron Bath. I believe we also have Carl Stanley cutting down to 242, and the list seems like it just gets deeper and deeper.
Stacked list.
Deeper and deeper the more names you look at.
Yeah. So did you qualify for that?
It's more sort of like an invitational. So like you put your name, like people try and put their name in there, and if there were only 32 put their names in, then there's those 32, but there was a lot more than 32 put their names in, so they kind of went through and checked qualifications, checked experience and how they would weigh with everyone else, and they picked the 32 best for the job. And they're coming from across the country and probably across North America, if I had to guess, because all those round robins they have come from across North America.
Okay, and so that's sort of more immediate. Do you have anything kind of far off maybe you're thinking about?
Far off?
Yeah, any big goals?
Big goals is obviously the number 1 in North America spot. Like that's I mean it's only 7-8 spots away left-handed.
Yeah.
So I mean directly above me you got Derek Smith left-handed, and he just announced his match with Travis Bajan at East versus West 13. Yeah. Like to see how that goes. Derek's a big name. Travis is a big name. Above Paul, I was looking, and there's not a single person on there that it's not an elite.
Oh yeah.
So it's me sitting there. I kind of tested my mettle a little bit by pulling with Paul, and his experience showed. But I'm gonna take the next few months and and address my weaknesses. Not only that he showed me, but by me going and practicing with the Carolina Chaos crew that they showed me. And I do plan on adding them into my rotation to solidify the connections within my arm.
Okay, cool. Okay, so you're just talking about Carolina Chaos. I think that kind of switches into my next thing. I want to talk about the culture of arm wrestling, arm wrestling clubs. I did want to tell me a little bit about your time at the Carolina Chaos practice. I know they're kind of a nice little closed off practice, and they are killers.
They are. I mean,
probably
not,
one of the best in the South. Maybe even the best in the South.
I would say they're one of the best, if not the best in the country, because they are like no doubt. I mean, everyone there is on a new level. Not even like it's crazy. You got Chad Silvers, you got Shane Owens, um, you got Ryan, you got Adam, um, you got Hunter, which he just announced his 185 match he's got.
Yep.
And man, let me tell you, for a little guy, he is ridiculously strong. It's like everyone there they test me, because not only are they extremely solid pullers, not only are they experienced, but they're very technical in the way they pull and the way they arm wrestle. But they don't just take what they want and then go. They coach you through it. They allow you to develop. Chad Silvers, he's kind of like their coach, or their Mr. Miyagi, for, if you want to say that, or Master Splinter. He kind of giving his, because that's a bad dude. Like he's got so many national titles. So
when you got biceps like that,
like showing up to practice and it looks like just a bunch of tanks walking around. And it's kind of intimidating, but it's super exciting because like I know that I get to arm wrestle with them, and it's extremely.
I want to go up there sometime.
It's soon. Daunting and exciting at the same time.
So still thinking about the culture of arm wrestling, and I think you have an interesting perspective on this, because you started young, and so you've been in the sport a while, but you're still maybe considered maybe a young arm wrestler to some people. What do you see as the difference between some of these younger, newer arm wrestlers as opposed to those who've been pulling a while? What are some like core differences that you see?
I think the core difference is the mindset of it all. A lot of the newer arm wrestlers, like they see the social media input, they see the influence, they see Devin Lair, they see Michael Todd, they see all of these high level arm wrestlers, and then they think to themselves like, yeah, I can reach that, and you absolutely can. And arm wrestling is, at the very base of it, a strength sport, but it's not as similar to like a strength sport as, for say, just like bodybuilding or powerlifting. Yes, those are strength sports, but I would honestly say arm wrestling is more similar to rock climbing or a strongman competition, because those two, yes, you need to be strong for them, but your tendons and ligaments, your connective tissue need to be developed just as much, if not more than your muscular tissue. Because once you start developing your muscular tissue, your muscle density and your muscle strength without that tendon and ligament and connective tissue building with it, that's when injuries happen. That's when things start to go wrong. Whenever you start to get that aching feeling in your tendons, like I got on last Thursday, that I was getting like my bicep right here. That's kind of when you need to call it, because that's whenever you start stacking micro tears and get the bigger injuries. So as people stay in the sport longer, they realize it's not all about just going as hard as you can at practice every single time, but it's finding your weakness and working on it. And sometimes you do need to go a little bit lighter at practice. Sometimes you need to go a little bit harder, and sometimes you might need some bands on because you might be feeling way too strong. But that's the key difference is the maturity within the sport, because obviously PEDs are getting more and more popular in today's world, whether that be testosterone or any other supplementation added in. It's dangerous for new pullers because the muscles can develop way faster than the tendons and ligaments because there's definitely not as much blood flow. So you can definitely have a more natural strength in arm wrestling because of your how you were raised or the type of career that you have or experiences that you have. But at some point, you're going to hit a wall of, okay, I might need to slow down a little bit so I don't injure myself. Or, Lord forbid, you do get injured.
Yeah. So you got a lot of these younger people with the temptation to get big, get huge, get injured, and so there's an advantage to getting in a team, somebody who knows what they're doing, who actually knows how to arm wrestle. Yeah. So that's good. On the very very similar idea, because I think a lot of people in the sport, or even just fans of the sport, are newer to the sport. So what are your thoughts on some of these online commentators, online arm wrestling, as opposed to those who aren't actually like just in a team, like aren't even practicing every week? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I love the idea of arm wrestling being larger on social media platforms because it grows the sport and it allows it to flourish. Not only does it bring people in, but like it brings bigger names in because obviously most people in the arm wrestling community know that Brian Shaw has kind of been more interested recently. He actually is having a fitness expo. He'll be at the Music City Fitness Expo on June 8th up in Nashville. And the Tennessee crew, the Tennessee Arm Wrestling Association, have rented a booth there and having some matches there. And they're having some an outing to hopefully get some newer eyes in there. And we're kind of hoping he might stop by the booth and kind of arm wrestle a little bit because that'd be kind of fun.
That would be pretty
to
good.
grip up with him.
Yeah, I've heard good things about his just the sheer strength and control. It's not a lot of technique. Just didn't have those experiences, but just the amount of just holding it right there.
And him having that strongman background and him having that the competitive nature and the willingness to fully commit to everything because like he fully committed to his MMA or his UFC match he was going to do. Unfortunately, that fell through, I think. But he's very competitive and he absolutely like with that base understanding of his tendons and ligaments because he's so smart. He's going to go a long way.
So thinking back to the team, we talked a little about arm wrestling teams. What are some different things that can make a good arm wrestling team? I think there's different types of teams. What are some things that can make a good team, make a great team?
I think the number one thing required for a team is consistency, and obviously someone willing to you don't even need someone willing to offer up their house for an arm wrestling practice because I remember growing up, we didn't even always go to someone's house. We would meet at a public park somewhere because everyone would work. They would just bring their table with them to work. It's like, hey, I'll be at this park at this time, and then we would go arm wrestle for an hour, hour and a half, and then we would go home. So it's like you don't even you just need the consistency of people showing up and wanting to grow and develop together. Um, that's what makes a good team. What I think starts to push the line of going into a great team is understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses and being able to work with them and wanting to help them develop those. So if someone is wanting to work on their cupping for the day or their ready goes for the day, um, being willing to assist them in that. If someone has an injury, being able to pull around or arm wrestle around that injury. It's the small little things of making those adjustments and helping others grow, not only just yourself.
Okay. Um, this one's maybe some personal bias here. How would you describe Southern Southeastern arm wrestling as opposed to some other places? Do you think there's some uniqueness to Southern arm wrestling?
I would compare Southern arm wrestling to Southern football.
Mm,
Um, it is, yes, there is football. Yes, there is arm wrestling in other parts of the country, and there are some good players in the on the football teams. Um, but I do believe that once you get to the SEC, a lot of the quality increases, the competitive nature increases, the sheer depth of all of the all of the pullers, experiences, strengths. It grows. So it makes everything. I feel like there's a lot more in the South, in my opinion.
quality, the depth, the the names.
Hmm.
I mean, just in Georgia alone, I mean, you've got so many famous
Right. Right.
pullers.
And then you go up to Tennessee, and then you got like Tim Bresnan, and you got
Yeah.
Dakota Ballard, who's been on the North America rankings. You got Terry Preston, who's one of the top 176 in the nation. He's and then you got, I believe Doug Allen lived in Tennessee for a little bit. Um, you got people, and then you got the Jenkins family. Like they have a lot of national titles. They have some of the family have world titles. Um, so it's just I feel like in the South, the rest of the country can do it, but I think the South does it better.
Mm. Now, if you had to pick, would you pick Georgia or Tennessee for the best arm wrestlers?
Um, I think that's a loaded question
It might be.
because I do think there are some benefits to being in Georgia for arm wrestling because like there are definitely some higher level pullers. You got Paul Passmore, Ron Bath, Jerome Loud, and so on. So there's definitely that level of arm wrestlers to reach for. But in Tennessee, there's a lot more. Let me go back to Georgia, and not even just talking about like here, but like you got like Cody Woods over in Western Georgia, I believe, and you got groups all over the place. But it seems like to me in Georgia, there's not much middle ground. It seems like
Yeah.
once you get to a point, like there's no mid level. You just go straight to the high level.
Mhm.
Um, in Tennessee, I feel there's a lot more depth, a lot more to choose from, a lot more. Honestly, it feels like a lot more pullers. It seems like a lot more arm wrestlers in Tennessee, and maybe it's just because I was there a little bit longer. But I'm in both group chats, and it always seems like there's like 4 or 5 practices going on every week in Tennessee,
Mm.
and the it seems that I've watched them grow, and as some people get into this, as some of the Tennesseans would get into the sport, seeing where they're at now, it's the level is completely different. It's not like the cap is not different, but like the average is a lot
That's
higher.
interesting. Yeah, I say that I say that all the time about Georgia because it's like you got some kind of you know regular Joes regular Joes nationally ranked in just about every weight class. I think. So we'll switch gears here, thinking about training,
Mm-hmm.
approaching the sport. How do we think about it? How do we approach it? We'll start with how do you talked about some of your goals. How do you approach training for these short term, long term goals, and how do you describe your training philosophy?
um, for me, I I've had quite a few injuries throughout my arm wrestling career. I've never had like a full UCL tear, but I've had some quite large ones to where it's like I've had to take months off or not even put any pressure on there. So I'm a huge advocate for ensuring that you have plenty of recovery training every single day, all day if you want. Just always be squeezing something, always be doing some sort of motion to get some blood flow going, because um, your hands and your forearm are something that you use so much that there's constant blood flow, constant regeneration, constant breakdown. So if you're always doing something, and there's enough muscles in your forearms to where like you can work something different every single day, and it you not get wore out, and you not start breaking down to the point to where like you're losing gains instead of making gains. So I've always been a huge pusher, a huge supporter of recovery. So it's the high rep stuff that gets blood flow going. And so right now, like I mentioned some of the short term goals and some of the long term goals I had, and I was pointed out. It was I've noticed some chinks in my armor, some things that I need to work on. That being my cupping, and I've got some exercises I've added in, some new toys that I've made while at work, to hopefully assist in those developments. But honestly, I think table time is key. Table time is key. If I had the choice, I would arm wrestle twice a week. But
Mhm.
it's hard to get people to want to commit to twice a week, because
Yep.
that's
A lot of wear and tear, a
pushing
lot of
like
time.
33% of the week
Right.
going arm wrestle.
Yeah. So, how do you, when you're training, how do you just mostly just listen to your body when's too much, when's not enough? Do you
Yeah,
try to prioritize gym time or blood
I
flow, certain things?
I think both are very important. Um, it's hard to structure your training around like table time, because if you're going to the gym consistently, and you're working out and working those muscle groups, for arm wrestling, because like for arm wrestling, if you extend your arm out, you can compress and figure out every little muscle that you might need for arm wrestling. So like it's hard to do anything upper body without hitting some sort of muscle group that'll be used for arm wrestling. So it's knowing that while working out, you're not going to be 100%, and not overdoing that, because if you go to the gym one morning and you work back and buys, and then you go to practice and you again work back and buys, because you're doing those lat drags, you're rising and whatnot, and quite easy to overwork. So you would need to focus and try and structures like, oh, if I have arm wrestling practice today, maybe do a little bit lighter workout that morning and use arm wrestling as like the main workout, or maybe do a bigger workout in the morning and just work on technique stuff to practice.
Okay. Okay. Um, Keeping in training, how do you approach diet and supplementation? I mean, I know you're talking about cutting some weight.
Hmm.
How do you structure that? How do you work that in? Do you have a certain diet you prefer? Or is there certain supplements you prefer? Like you have a top, supplement you'd recommend, things like that.
So for me, I've always had the issue of I've never really lost weight healthily. Being joining the army, being in the army, I was always just like, I need to go on right now, right here, immediately. So I would lose weight in the most unhealthy way possible, as fast as possible, and it's kind of messed up my metabolism to where it's a lot slower than what it needs to be. So right now, I'm kind of just taking the most simplistic approach of calories in versus calories out, and of course just keeping some common sense of maybe not just eat junk all the time, because I mean, yeah, you can eat junk and have calories in versus calories out, and you would still technically be in a calorie deficit, but you would not be getting the appropriate nutrients, the appropriate um, um, building blocks for your muscles and your skeletal system and nervous system and whatnot.
Okay.
But,
So
but I'm a but I'm a
yeah.
I'm a huge fan of a keto diet,
Okay.
of cutting
Hmm.
out carbs, or going even more extreme, going like a carnivore diet. That's what I always grew up on, because like honestly, like growing up with my dad, that's most of the times what we'd eat for supper anyway. He'd give me some meat and tell me to go put it on the grill, and that's what we'd have for supper. I mean, and I'm a happy man with that.
Yeah,
You give me
absolutely.
a plate of meat, and you won't
New
hear me
York strips, some ground beef, some
anything.
eggs, something.
I will be a-okay.
Absolutely. So that's your diet supplementation. How do you approach supplementation?
I really don't take too much. Um, the only thing I really take is a collagen supplement. Um, because as I was saying, it's like getting back into it and increasing the training capacity, making sure your connective tissue has enough nutrition to rebuild is very important, and it'll help with how fast they recover. Because you can do all the recovery work that you want, you can do all the blood flow work that you want, but if you don't have the proper nutrients to go to them, then they definitely won't heal the same way. So really, all I take is I take obviously my daily multivitamin, but I throw in some electrolyte um, supplements as well to get that in there because collagen is very tricky when it comes to breaking it down. You do need certain electrolytes. You do need some vitamin C to allow it to absorb and be activated and be put into the collagen synthesis process. I do have just some pre-workout I take in the morning before I go to work, just to get me going. So I mean that's nothing serious. So I really don't do too much supplementation. I
Okay.
mean I get all my nutrients from just eating most of the time.
Um, Still thinking about training. If you could break down maybe even a top three, a top five, what were some moments or some discoveries, so a moment where you learned something on the table, um, some sort of observation that you made that really sticks out where you like that light bulb moment that helped you improve either maybe your style or just the approach to the sport as a whole? What were some of those like, maybe your kind of your top tips you've learned over your time in arm wrestling?
The very first one that I can remember, um, and going back to one of the main influencers in my development as an arm wrestler, David Owens. He was teaching me the top roll, right? Um, of course, my style, my pressures of top roll is a little bit different than most, but I remember him teaching me as we were going, and it was like him being an adult and me being a child. He would want to say it's like pouring a pitcher of beer, but he would always change it to pouring a glass of milk. So it's like you're wanting to pour a glass of milk, and that's how you want to apply your pressure. But the biggest thing that he told me is like whenever you're applying the back pressure, you always want to be applying the pressure to where if you slip, you'll hit yourself in the nose. If you're watching your hand and you're applying that pressure, that means you're applying the pressure in the right way. Um, Now, another thing that I recently come across, I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. I don't know why I've never really put those two together. Is I was at a practice and watching two people arm wrestle, and of course, there's always that traditional moment where it's like someone's holding, and then like the way you arm wrestle, you're pretty explosive in the way you do it. And I was watching the way the other person was handling it, and he wasn't just catching it; he was eating, like he was pushing the motion away. He wasn't just
Mm-hmm.
taking it; he was deferring it and making it to where it's like a little rubber band going in different ways,
Yep.
deferring that pressure. And that was a recent development for me that just clicked. I was like, oh, okay. I mean, that makes perfect sense because if you can't go sideways, where are you going to go?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I saw Paul talk about that just last time I went to his practice. He was talking about how if he knows someone's going to hit, he'll just kind of he won't hit. He'll either cup in and kind of pronate, and just let them take their own wrist. They'll just hit
Mm.
so hard inside they'll take their own wrist. Was there anything else that maybe even so some observations and people teaching you? Um, was there maybe a moment in your training, these you got these aha moments, but like where you really were like, oh, I'm pretty good at this, when something kind of came together when you were pulling and you kind of like realized you had this kind of unique style or potential?
Obviously, I mean, I've always heard that my rise pressure and my back pressure are have been I've always been like the topping topic, like the talking subject of wherever I go. Because I remember going back to the amateur nationals I went to up in I believe it was Cincinnati, where it was. Um, I was after pulling for probably 3 or 4 hours because everyone was like, your back pressure is ridiculous. Like the pressure that you can just pull back, it's like I can barely keep my elbow on the ground, or on the table, more like it. And it's the way that I apply my top roll pressure, um, typically attacks people's hands a little bit differently than the traditional. Hey, I'm just going to take your wrist top roll. I normally go for more of a low hand top roll, and my long levers and back pressure allow for a little bit different style than most. So a lot of times I focus on that specific aspect of my training because I kind of obviously that's almost always been my ace in the hole of just being able to ride that out. Given still needing to be a smart puller, but if I can keep developing that up and up and up and up, then we'll see where it goes.
Sky's the limit. Okay, last question here. I think the big one. What to you is the appeal of arm wrestling? What's the appeal?
At the very basis of it, um, I would say the competitive nature of it. But you can do a lot of things in your life and have a competitive, like that sense of, hey, I'm still competitive. I'm not a waste. Like I'm still involved. Like I can still do this. Um, but for arm wrestling, it's not one of those sports to where, like football, you reach a certain age, you got to stop because your body's breaking down, or basketball or baseball. It's like you see all these other professional sports. They reach this age that's their peak in that sport, and they kind of just got to get out. Like they don't get re-signed. They get pushed out and they're retired. They don't really do anything but hobbies for the rest of their life. But arm wrestling is a very unique sport in the fact that it does not go away as you get older. Um, quite the opposite, typically. That as you get older, as long as you take care of yourself and keep up your training, you can keep growing, keep that strength, and continue to be at the top of the game. For I don't want to say indefinitely, because there's definitely a point to where your body starts deteriorating, but it's you can continue to do it as an old man, like old man, older, even as you get injuries, because you got some older gentlemen that are in the sport that are still they're legends in the sport, but they're also still really big key players in the sport. Because like you got Ron Bath, he's in his 60s, right? He's still absolutely killing the game. And you got Tim Bresnan, who's a little bit older and he's been around a while and at the top of the game. I think I just saw that he's actually still top 15 in the world. Um, and you got older people. Older people is not really the way I want to say it. The more seasoned arm wrestlers that are still at the top of the game, like John Brzezinski, Devin Larratt, Michael Todd. They're not old, but they're definitely keeping the torch. Whenever in other sports, that torch would have already been handed off to the next generation of athletes. And I think that's a unique trait of arm wrestling is that you can continue on as long as you take care of yourself, as long as you're willing to keep going on.
So would you say at the core of that, and this is maybe the appeal for me, and maybe I think you're hitting on the same ideas, at the core of seeing those people arm wrestle for a long time, would you say it's really the pursuit of mastery? It's something you can do. It's almost like a chess. You can keep playing. You can be Gary Kasparov. You can keep playing for the rest of your life. Is that
Mm-hmm.
sort of part of that appeal.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. I mean, you can keep doing it. I mean, yeah, there's arm wrestling is the way I've described it is you're essentially injuring yourself on purpose. So whenever people first get into the sport and they get their newbie pains, those suck. Um, absolutely suck. I'm glad I went through them when I was younger because like everything recovers a lot faster. Um, but that's essentially tearing your UCL and putting pressures on your skeletal system and your connective tissue that's not meant to be there. Like you're not meant to have that pressure on your body, but as it develops and as it grows, um, it just keeps growing. It just keeps going and keeps going. Um, and the more solid it gets, obviously the more you can kind of just get away from that. But you're constantly chasing like, hey, this is injured, so let me develop this. This is injured, so let me develop this. And at the end of the day, you have a well-rounded, well-versed, and tank of an arm to arm wrestle with. And yeah,
It's like a metaphor for life. Yeah, wonderful. So thank you all for doing this.
Absolutely.
Thank everyone for joining us and enjoying this content. And we look forward to maybe doing some more in the future.
Sweet. Yeah.